All right, we are going to get started here. Hi, everyone. My name is Tim Capali, and I was part of the program committee for Authenticate this year. I'll be moderating the rest of this track with Matt. So Matt and I were both presenting and moderating this one. We lost your deck. Matt's going to be doing some questions about WebAuthn, and we'll get his deck up here in a second. So Matt is a tech lead at Cisco Duo, working on the primary SME for FIDO and passwordless. I've been working with him for a number of years, and he's going to do some common questions from RP developers. So I will hand it over to him.
Cool.
And we're going to do questions at this mic at the end.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Tim. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Miller, technical lead at Cisco Duo. Been working with passkeys, WebAuthn since about 2020. And have come across a lot of pain points when working with WebAuthn. I want to take an opportunity to share out some of these things with you. These are also questions that people have had about using WebAuthn on like Stack Overflow and whatnot that I fielded that have kind of risen up to the top for the number of times that they've been asked. So by way of introduction, I call myself a WebAuthn SME. Feels a little back patty, but at Cisco and Duo, with a particular eye on the relying party developer experience. WebAuthn has some sharp edges to it, and I've done what I can to sort of smooth over those, particularly within the W3C, working at the Web Authentication Working Group. I have written a couple of WebAuthn libraries. TypeScript is Simple WebAuthn is a browser and server combination that I work on. PyWebAuthn is Duo's official Python WebAuthn library. I'm the current maintainer of that as well. And I am the current maintainer of webauthn.io, which you may or may not have heard of. If you have and you have ideas for it, please hit me up. I'm always looking for ways to improve that experience for testing out WebAuthn. This is my third year doing Authenticate. My first was Authenticate 2022 in Seattle. Turns out I have a lot of fun doing this, so I keep coming back, or they keep letting me come back. Let's dive right into it. I frame all of these as how do I questions. And the first one is how do I use passkeys on a site accessed by IP address? Now, WebAuthn, if you go look in the docs, WebAuthn, let me take these off. WebAuthn says that it has to be executed from a quote-unquote secure context. It's an actual standard execution environment that browsers may enforce. It's basically three simple things. That site must be served over a valid TLS connection. If it's not, it's because it must be a local host, so either HTTP:/localhost or like something .localhost are fine. 127.0.0.1 is technically a secure, an address from which secure context can be derived, and file URIs are considered secure as well. For sites embedded in iframes, everything up the sort of parent relationship all the way up to the root document has to be served over TLS in order for a secure context to be, for WebAuthn calls to succeed. So we want to focus on that IP address. And you noted here that 127.0.0.1 is technically a secure context. However, browsers won't let you do that, nor will they allow you to use intranet addresses to call WebAuthn. You have to, part of the security of WebAuthn comes from the origin binding, and origins are lean on DNS to establish a higher bar for attackers to go after, and also it's easier to issue certificates for domain names. So that's why you can't use WebAuthn on an IP address. A question that's come up pretty regularly over the years is how do I require only biometrics for UV? You can't. Biometrics are a convenience over PIN entry because the biometric check for user verification is a local access device check. And how do you register a biometric pattern to complete that? You enter the unlock PIN. So that PIN is always going to be the fundamental protection. Now, I know this question, over the years, I've sort of intuited that this question must come from a native app model mentality, where in the native apps, I believe you can call the platform APIs in a way that requires biometric. The browser doesn't have anything like that. So if you're limited to the browser, you have to accept the fact that user verification can take place via PIN entry on the access device. It is still pretty hard. The attacker does have to get that. They can't remotely compromise you in some way just because it's a PIN. Like that's how you unlock the local device. Remote attacks are still foiled. So the next question is, how do I tell an authenticator when a credential is deleted. Now you might be asking yourself, this is kind of weird, like why would a relying party want to do that? Well, the fact of the matter is there's two sets of state in a WebAuthn ceremony that must be maintained. One is the relying party's knowledge of what is valid for use to sign into that party, and the other one is the provider and its knowledge of what passkeys it has for the website. A common way that these two can fall out of sync is the website has some sort of self-management portal that the user can go in and they can delete passkeys. That doesn't do anything for the passkeys that are in the passkey provider. And so the next time the user goes in, autofill UI is going to show passkey options for that site that the website will never accept for authentication. So then the user goes ahead and clicks on one of those because maybe they forgot or they mismanaged and they clicked the wrong one. And authentication fails. And they're like, well, what's going in? I know I have an account for this. And you got to work it all out. So what I want to give you all is an impromptu preview of 3 new API methods coming to public key credential that are holistically called the Signals API. Now the first new signal is called Signal Unknown Credential. This is a method that relying parties can call after a failed WebAuthn registration to ask the browser to talk to the provider that was just used for that failed authentication ceremony because a valid response was generated, but the website decided to reject it. So an RP, after going, nah, we're not going to allow that for whatever reason. It could be whatever reason. This is the RP firing and forgetting a signal out to the browser going, hey, talk to that provider and tell them not to show that as an option because it will never work for here. And so the RP, I want to emphasize that all of these signal APIs are fire and forgets. You're not going to block on UI on any of this. You're going to make the call and you're going to just entrust that signal to the browser for the browser to do its best effort to talk to the authenticator to mark that credential as no longer valid. Delete it, hide it, whatever. That would be on the provider to decide what it wants to do at that point. There we go. Next one is signal all accepted credentials. This would be a second signal that would be a collection of all of basically the credential IDs you would put in an allow list. At any point in time, an RP can call this after successful sign-on, after some sort of self-service of the user's credentials. The RP can call this method. It doesn't have to be after a ceremony of any kind. You can just call this at any time. And then the browser will take this. The browser is free to sort of cache it for, 30 seconds or whatever, try to do what it can to query any authenticators that might be available, and then get that message out to any provider that might recognize those credential IDs. And if it doesn't know any of those, then maybe it would hide all of its options for that site. So it stops showing up as an option because the website is actively signaling, I don't recognize any of these, and I won't recognize them. And so the user won't be prompted to try something that's probably going to end in failure. The third signal is signal current user details. This one is great because this brings this is a solution for a long-standing problem of my identifier as a person has changed in life, my name has changed, my email address has changed. How do you get that signal back to the authenticator? Because authenticators in passkeys flows, discoverable credentials are often stored with user metadata that is associated with that user and gets shown in your drop-down UI or whatever. And if somebody changes names, they don't want to see their old name in as many places as they can. This finally gives RPs a mechanism for signaling those life event changes or whatever changes, like you just simply change an email, out to the providers that have that metadata so they have a chance to update it and start showing correct values. Now, I don't have an ETA on when these are going to come out. So it's a big TBD right now, but there is very strong interest from the platforms and browsers, and so it's coming soon. It's probably the best I can give you. Now, moving on from signals, the question is, how do I use passkeys from across domain iframe? Now, there's two parts to this. There's essentially the website being embedded has to do something, and the website doing the embedding has to do something as well. And the reason I bring this up is because if you actually look at the spec, it's kind of hard to understand this. You got to dive into like another spec that I don't even remember the name of, but it governs how that allow attribute on the iframe is governed by a completely different spec. So anyway, the relying party, the site that is going to be facilitating the WebAuthn ceremony while embedded should omit an HTTP header called xframe options. Just get rid of it. So that's going to tell the browser it's OK for this site to be embedded on a different site. The site doing the embedding in its iframe allow attribute should specify the public key credential get value. And so that together is going to allow a website. Why is this not clicking? There we go. Like webauthn.io. to successfully log in while it's embedded in a different website. So this is pretty unremarkable as far as examples go, but this is just a demonstration of how it all coming together. Now, next question is, how do I skip registration when an authenticator is already registered? Tim touched a little bit on this on his presentation just before mine. Relying parties may want to show guidance going, hey, you're actually okay, you've registered that before, just go ahead and try to log in. The way to do that is to leverage two things: exclude credentials in the options that you pass to navigator.credentials.create. That's going to be an array of all of the user's valid credential IDs that can be used, that have already been registered with the site. And so when a user goes into a registration ceremony and they attempt to use an authenticator that recognizes one of the entries in that exclude credentials, there's going to be a very specific, this is one of the only identifiable errors in WebAuthn. It's called invalid state error. When a relying party's code sees that name, invalid state error, that can be a reliable signal that the user just tried to register something that they had already registered. So then you can show them, hey, try to log in instead. That one's good. You've already, I know what that's, I recognize that authenticator. Now this one is going to be focused on relying party ID. How do I use passkeys on different domains? This scoping of RPIDs can be a little bit tricky to wrap your head around if you've never had to sort of think about this before. RPID, as defined in the spec, is a valid domain string identifying WebAuthn relying party on whose behalf a given registration or authentication ceremony is being performed. Great. What does that mean practically? Most relying parties can keep things simple with an RPID that's just your root domain. So in this case, we're calling it example.com. But you can also specify subdomains as your RPID. So in this case, maybe you have a login.example.com on which everyone is funneled through to facilitate authentication. So in that case, you might specify login.example.com. Multi-tenancy is also served by this. You could have a cust1.example.com, and passkey scoped for that would not work for login into cust2.example.com. So now you have to be mindful of scope and how scope, like where a passkey is valid for use, is impacted by your choice of RPID. So we're going to have a little bit of a quiz here. Can a passkey registered with RPID of example.com be used to sign in to example.com? Great. Good job. Now, can that same credential be used to sign in to login.example.com? And the answer to that is yes. Correct. Great. Now, let's talk about login.example.com. Let's say you've scoped your passkey to that. Can a passkey scoped to login.example.com be used to sign in to example.com? I thought I was going to get you on that one. No, you cannot. Can you use it for login.example.com? Of course you can. So that's one way. I'm going to go back real quick. That's one way in which you have to be very mindful of that value you're specifying, especially at registration time, because you have to kind of think ahead. Like, maybe, is my architecture going to change significantly? Am I going to, I don't know, you just got to think about that, because the passkey, if you don't scope your passkeys correctly, you will have to deal with migrating users to a passkey on a different RPID, and that can be very painful and very confusing for your users. Now, this is the last how do I use passkey on related domains? And this is something that is very near and dear to Tim because he put a tremendous amount of effort in delivering this. It is called related origins. This is a very new capability that is coming to WebAuthn. It has some adoption, not equally yet, but again, this is another capability that has strong interest signal from all the major platforms and browsers, so it's coming to everywhere soon. Essentially, this is a way for organizations that exist on multiple domains, including different country-level TLDs, to use the same passkey for login on all of those different domains. So here we have an example of a website. It's a shopping website, some kind of e-commerce website. All of their users are registering on shopping.com. And maybe one of those users decides to go to Japan, and they end up, because of various regional redirects that are just a normal part of this, end up on shopping.co.jp. Now they want to go sign in. Without related origins, the user would basically be locked out. And they're like, well, I've been to shopping, I know shopping, I have a relationship with them, why can't I sign in? Related origins unblocks this, because what happens is, on shopping.co.jp, that website would call WebAuthn with an RPID of shopping.com. Now, of course, again, as we just discussed, that doesn't work because shopping.co.jp is not the same origin as shopping.com. But what the browser will do is it will see that RPID, go, this isn't shopping.com. I'm going to go and I'm going to download /.wellknown/webauthn, look at the list of origins inside it, and see if shopping.co.jp is inside there. And of course, as we see here, it is, so that it will allow the WebAuthn ceremony to kick off. So the same RPID of shopping.com is going to be passed to the authenticator. Of course, the authenticator is going to recognize it because it has a passkey for shopping.com. The response will come back just like normal. Like the WebAuthn ceremony is unchanged itself. This is the browser allowing for cross-domain use of a passkey when that passkey is scoped to a different domain. There are some, it's not quite as cut and dry as like, oh yes, origins has a finite size that it must be in. There's this concept of labels. You can have up to 5 unique labels. Each label can have any number of TLDs assigned to it. And so for more information, there's an excellent write-up on passkeys.dev. Just go ahead and look for related origins under advanced use cases, and it will explain everything on how to take advantage of this great new capability. And so with that, why don't we open it up to Q&A?
All right, yeah, go ahead and read it.
Super excited for the Signal API.
Yeah.
I have a question, which is not very clear on the GitHub and everywhere. You mentioned that it's going to be a fire and forget, like hoping that the authenticator will do their best to do whatever they want. Also, some places it is mentioned that for privacy concerns, the WebAuthn client might show things to the users, hey, your RP is trying to do whatever. So is it true, or who controls that pop-up?
That's a great question. It's really up to, in that case, it's probably the provider that I would imagine would show that. The spec will not dictate what the browser and what the provider will do in response to the Signal API. The spec will only dictate the shape of the API. What happens when that's called is really on the browser and the provider to figure out what to do. Consent to update credential metadata is probably a provider concern. You know, instead of just sort of changing it out from under them, maybe they'll change it and then show a thing going, hey, we updated your metadata because the website said you changed your name. You know, those are flows and those are experiences that are going to be iterated on over time.
Got it. So even the providers could go to the lens of doing a verification before doing that. It's completely up to them?
Sure, and it could be like, do you want to allow this? And the user says no, and nothing happens. That could be an experience as well that could come out of that.
Got it. Like one more question, very quick. Related domains, the related origin.
Oh, yes.
So you gave an example of like login.example.com, right? And that can be shared as long as it is example.com.
Right.
But if I have something like x.login.example.com, which is one level above the subdomain, do we have to like fall back to the related origins, or can we share one level after the subdomain as well?
You can go up. So as long as login, so in your x.login.example.com, if your RPID is scoped to login.example.com, it's perfectly fine for x.login.example.com.
Oh, but if I want to share between x.login.example.com and y.login.example.com, so that's where
That's where related origins would come in handy for you.
Got it. Thank you.
Let me do one online. This should be quick. On RPID scope, can a passkey registered at www.example.com be used on example.com and vice versa?
Register for www.example.com? No, that goes back to the earlier example where if it's scoped for login.example.com, it's not good for example.com. It doesn't matter that subdomain. Yeah.
So also a question about related origins. So if I try to log into a domain and like you said related origins allows me to use a passkey for a different domain, does it actually check the known the JSON online for that other domain as well? Or can I like spin up a random website, say, use your Google passkey on my website and like maybe man in the middle Google passkeys that way?
No, in that case, google.com would host a /wellknown/webauthn that is the exclusive list of other domains that are able to exercise RPID of google.com. and so an attacker's man-in-the-middle website would, of course, not be included on there. And so the browser would go, just like it does today, that RPID is not valid for the current origin.
Okay, so it checks both domains. It checks the one that I'm trying to log into and the one that the passkey belongs to.
No, there's a normal check already to see if RPID is scoped for the current website. And when it's not, then the browser will go to the actual RPID. This is a URL. This is a web page that can be accessed. The browser will query and grab this and check to see if the attacker's domain is in that list, and it won't be. And so it'll just fail the ceremony regularly, normally.
Right, so let's say I try to log into shopping.com.
Right.
But my passkey belongs to shopping.ca. Like the browser currently only knows I'm trying to log into shopping.com. So that's like the well-known thing that it can check.
So on that shopping.com call, shopping.ca would be the RPID.
Correct.
And then the browser would go to shopping.ca instead.
Say shopping.com is malicious.
Well, shopping.ca would have a well-known that would have to specify shopping.com.
Okay, so it checks both ways. That's
Whatever the RPID is, that's what's fetched. So you are authoritative for your RPID, and you say you forward the girl out. So it's authoritative to your RPID. Sorry. So yeah, so I'll repeat that real quick. So it's authoritative to the RPID, right? So the client will fetch to the RPID. So if you start on shopping.ca, it will only get the list of valid origins for shopping.ca. So that's why you don't need the bidirectional check. Yeah.
Sweet, thanks, Tim.
Let me do one more online question. If a website's root domain changes, will existing passkeys stop working? Can passkeys from the old domain be reused? Does related domains feature useful here?
You would have to, the defunct domain would have to remain alive long enough to host related origins, the well-known. And so like if the domain completely goes away or an attacker gets it, like related origins is probably not going to help you there because you could abuse it. It could be abused.
Another one for this topic. Is this only for assertions or can this also be used for registering?
This would be for it would be both? Okay, yeah. Yeah, if you go to passkeys.dev, if you go to passkeys.dev and go to the docs, there's an advanced use case with related origins that's going to have way more information than I had time for today, but Tim corrected me that it is for both. I thought it was primarily authentication. But.
And I'm going to take liberty here to say, this is really for only when you can't do federation. You should really do federation. This is for when you can't do federation. This is an escape patch.
Yeah, ideally you're going to use federation over this, yeah.
So I'm first going to say I should know this, but I don't. On native platforms, we have assetlinks.json and app site association files today that bind native apps to the same RPID as a web app. Is Related Origins going to replace that in a standardized fashion, or are those native platforms going to maintain their existing bespoke ways of doing that binding between a native app and a web platform?
If you know the answer.
So asset links was the original attempt to standardize this years ago, and people went in their own direction. So that's why it's separate. We did change it from WebAuthn-origins, the well-known, just to WebAuthn. So in case we need to add things later, you don't have to stand up another well-known. So that's the gift to future world.
Just a comment for the implementers in the room, both on this and on the subdomains. You're basically defining like a scope where people can use these for authentication, which means that they can use these for phishing, which is one of the reasons you might want to downscope to say like a login.example.com is to make sure that only your login infrastructure has access to passkeys. This is, in a way, an escape hatch for that, but you're still saying all of these sites, if they were compromised, can man in the middle of the authentication. They can't get private keys, et cetera, but they could potentially say, hey, we want to log you into using your shopping.com credential in the middle of interacting with shopping.com to try to compromise your account. So you don't open this too wide. This isn't something you use for like an affiliate network. This is really meant for, my company has domains across the world. I have services divided amongst different sites, and I need this functionality to make it all work because it's too big of a problem to just solve with federation.
Yeah, I mean, as like one of the authors of this feature, like I don't want people using it, but it's there when you're in a predicament and you have to support these events. If you're building a new deployment, try to do everything you can to do it, quote unquote, the right way. Not that things over time are not the right way, but things change. Try to do it the right way and try to avoid this. This is meant to be an escape hatch for very, 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 very large deployments, especially for the CCTLD use case, the country code top level domain. Sorry, Matt.
No, that's fine. I think that's probably going to do it. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. It was great.
Okay. We have